On the seventh day, God rested. I don't know about you, but I'm not so great with resting. Sleeping, yes. I am one of those people who pushes that 8-hour average up because I need around 9 hours of sleep a night to feel like I can get through the day. And I sometimes still need a power nap. But sleep and rest are not the same thing. Some people can sleep a lot and never feel rested and rejuvenated. And our text doesn't tell us that God slept, but that God rested. What's really interesting about this passage is in Hebrew, the first 6 days are called day 1, day 2, day 3, etc. But the seventh day is called Sabbath. It's different than the others. There's something special about it. On those prior 6 days, God was creating. God created light, night and day, sky, dry land, seas, vegetation, the sun, the moon, and the stars, birds and fish. And that's all the first 5 days. Then God had a really big day on the 6th day, creating animals, every kind of living creature, and then humankind. It's like God realized all of a sudden how much left there was to do and tried to cram it all in. So maybe those of us who procrastinate have some good precedents for it. A couple of things to know about Sabbath is that the actual Sabbath in the Bible is from Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. That is the seventh day. In the Bible, Sabbath was something celebrated by Jews. Later, when the early church became primarily non-Jewish, there was no connection to the seventh day nor too much of Hebrew scripture. And while we see in early Christian history that Christians began gathering together on Sundays, it only became really widespread when it became a mandate from Rome during Constantine's reign. All soldiers were to worship the supreme God, and Sunday was chosen not just because it was the day Christians gathered, but also in order to coincide with the day of the unconquered sun. What this did was make it easier for Christians to meet, and then later on more and more practices were added and refined to mimic Roman culture. Today, Sunday is not exactly a day of rest. Many people have jobs that require them to work on Sundays, and if people have the day off, it's often a day for yard work or going out to eat or sporting events or just planning for the next upcoming week. Rest isn't often scheduled in, and everything else tends to take precedence over it. Plus, in our culture, we tend to equate rest with laziness. But the idea of rest is so important that it was not just something that God did, but also became a commandment as part of God's covenant with the Hebrews after the Exodus from Egypt. It's not a coincidence that the two are connected. We've seen a lot of connections throughout this series between Genesis and other parts of the Bible. And so what connections can we see today? And what are the implications for us other than just taking a nap or getting enough sleep? When this part of Genesis that we've been reading the last few weeks was written, Israel was in exile, away from their home, wondering if chaos would always be a part of their life or if order could ever come out of it. And they were assured that yes, God brings order out of chaos, just like their ancestors long before who were in slavery, chaos in a way, in Egypt. And God brought them out of Egypt into the promised land, giving them a covenant that brought order to their lives. The connection of Sabbath, the fourth of the 10 commandments, to the context of Exodus and the other commandments, is the purpose of Walter Brueggemann's book, Sabbath as Resistance, Saying No to the Culture of Now. In this book, Brueggemann writes about how Sabbath is countercultural to what the Israelites had been experiencing in Egypt, explaining that Sabbath is both resistance to and an alternative to anxiety, coercion, exclusivism, and multitasking. And this anxiety, coercion, exclusivism, and multitasking is what Israel would be experiencing as they lived in exile among cultures that they understood to be pagan, who worshipped other gods, multiple gods, who didn't worship their God. While exile wasn't slavery in Egypt, it wasn't the covenantal life in their own homeland either. And there were a lot of temptations to abandon their covenant and become like the nations around them, to fit in and not be different. Those are also some topics that are pretty relevant to us today. Egypt's insatiable demand for more productivity meant slaves working longer and harder, with no day off, no time for family or play. This produces anxiety for everyone, for Pharaoh in never having enough and always demanding more, for Israel in never being able to produce enough, nor have their own lives of freedom. This productivity-driven, anxiety-causing system is one in which rest is not possible, because there is always something to be done. There is no stopping, no getting behind, no letting anything go, and no trusting that stepping away for a period of time can be beneficial. There is always the need to stay on task. There's no room for rest in a society that idolizes productivity, quick profit, consumption, instant gratification, and the fear of missing out. In the Bible and in Judaism, Sabbath is a stopping of all creative work. It's a special word called malacha. This came about when rabbis were trying to determine what constituted work. And so when they looked at the importance of Sabbath throughout Scripture and tradition, they saw that Sabbath took precedence over almost everything, including the building of the temple. And so every category of creative work that went into that became the types of work that couldn't be done on the Sabbath. It was that important. Now, it's not so stringent that nothing can ever be done. For example, saving a life would take precedence over stopping work. Sometimes we have this impression that Sabbath is just a bunch of rules and restrictions, when really, Sabbath is a gift. Brueggemann writes that being on the receiving end of a gift from God is hard for us, because we are used to being on the initiating end of things. It's easier for us to accomplish and achieve and possess. Think about gifts we give each other. It's often a lot easier to give someone a gift than it is to receive a gift from someone. Often we'll say, "You shouldn't have," because for some reason, we don't feel worthy of the gift. The gift of Sabbath rest is both difficult and urgent, Brueggemann says, because accepting and using it means that we defy the requirements of our society to produce and do. It means putting aside so much of what we value as consumers. That is one of the reasons we have had such a difficult time in the last few months. We've had to put our way of life on hold, give it a rest, since March. Everything has changed, and for a while, life was at a standstill, whether we liked it or not. It's difficult because we have to deal with delayed gratification. We don't like to wait, and we want everything to go back to our normal. We want our old normal pace, and many people are struggling with how life has been disturbed, uprooted, and put on hold. It's not the kind of rest any of us asked for, or wanted, or even ever imagined. Sabbath is a complete stop of almost everything we are used to. And we don't like that. We don't like being told no. We don't like being told we can't do what we want. We don't like delayed gratification. In some ways, we are all very much like toddlers. We like to keep everything going. We want businesses to be open when we want them, some for 24 hours. We want church to be available for us to go to, but we don't necessarily want to go. And we wear busyness like a badge of honor. Life can be exhausting. There's never enough time, it seems, to get everything done. I experience that every week and will probably experience it a lot more after my semester starts tomorrow. I'm moving from one really busy summer into a really busy fall, and attempting to preach about rest right in the middle of it. The busier we are, the more we think we don't have time or ability to rest. But that is when we need it even more. I need this lesson as much as anyone, but it's really easy to put rest aside, especially if it's not something that we experience as a community.
It's a lot easier for my Jewish friends to celebrate and observe Sabbath because they're not making individualistic choices. They are part of a community that does it together. Together, neighborhoods experience worship. They shut electronics off for 24 hours. They have big meals eaten with family and friends, and no chores, not even washing the dishes after the meals. It truly is a day of rest. We will justify our doing whatever we want, whenever we want, by claiming that anything else is legalistic and quoting Jesus telling people humankind isn't made for the Sabbath. Sabbath is made for humankind. But if Sabbath is made for humankind and is a gift from God, how are we treating that gift? Most often we treat rest like a gift that we didn't ask for and don't want, something that maybe we tolerate rather than enjoy. We know how to be restless, always looking for something else to do, rather than know how to experience rest. Brueggemann tells us that when we look at God and this Sabbath rest, what we see is a God committed to relationship rather than commodity. That this Sabbath rest of God is the acknowledgement that God and God's people in the world are not commodities to be dispatched for endless production. And that because we see that God rested, we see that God is not a workaholic, not anxious about the full functioning of creation, and that the well-being of creation does not depend on endless work. And then the version of the commandments we find in Exodus 31 tells us that on the seventh day, God rested and was refreshed. If God rested and got refreshed, who are we to think that we shouldn't? It's difficult to take an entire day to rest. I'm not even sure the last time I've done that because there is always something going on. Work is busy, or there's something to do around the house, or baseball games to go to, work to do, or studying or writing papers. So to take a rest, start with something small that makes you feel refreshed. For me, it's sitting here in my sunroom, most often in the early morning while the sun is rising, looking out the window and drinking my coffee. That is a time of rest for me. And I usually sit here for at least half an hour. There's no productivity, no anxiety, no multitasking. Well, except when I check social media. It's a time to just be. We all need that time to rest and be rejuvenated and simply be in God's presence. Because to be grounded in God's loving presence and to be able to return to it when we're depleted is what enables us to do the work in the world. Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. These words of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew are well known and often quoted. They are full of hope and promise for something more, and insightful in that Jesus recognized that people are weary and tired, encumbered by a heaviness they cannot get rid of on their own. God rested and commanded God's people to do the same. Jesus offers rest. It is a gift waiting to be opened. Will we all accept that gift?